next one is creating family values, right? This is one of the most important ones that happen for families, or an important thing to think about for families that often we don't do because we're just in the rush of everyday life, right? And so it kind of starts with talking about your family culture and using words like we, right? Like the Stoeber family doesn't litter, right? Our kids are pretty clear about that. You could get in trouble in our family if you threw something out the window because the Stoeber family doesn't litter, right? So my kids will actually check in with me about compostable items that they could toss out the window. Like, would an apple core be okay, or a piece of gum? And they check in with us because they know that's a family value that we have, right? But often we're not talking with our kids about what our family value is. And if we're not talking about it, guess who will tell our children what our family values are? Friends? Who else? Classmates? Teachers? Anybody else who was willing to tell our kids or give our kids messages about what family values are?
Groups that you're involved in, like church.
Groups, TV, right. So it could be really positive groups like a church group. It could be a not so positive group like a TV or a media, right? And so I think one way to talk about that with family, and when I talk about family culture, I mean your race, your religion, your community, and your sub-communities, right? So like, we're Christian and we go to such and such church. That's a sub-community of being Christian. Or, a lot of kids do some kind of family heritage study at some point, right? My kids know that their dad and I are from Iowa, right? That's a part of our culture. It's a part of our heritage because it says a lot about who we are as humans and where we're from and where our family's from, right? And so just talking a lot, like I call it playing the did you know game, Did you know that Grandma Sue immigrated here all the way from Ireland? And that's what makes you one half Irish. Do you know what Irish is? And those conversations can happen at the dinner table, they can happen on a car ride, they can happen on a long trip to the beach. But having those conversations where you're using that we language and talking about who are we as a family and where do we come from. Here's what the research tells us about creating communities and why it's important. In this global society, which in some ways can be so great, we're actually getting disconnected from our families, right? And when I think about that for my own family, I've got a brother in Georgia, my parents are separated, so I've got a mom in Iowa, another dad in Colorado, I've got sisters in Minnesota, and in South Dakota. This family's kind of sprinkled out everywhere, and we take for granted that, we can get a hold of them or FaceTime them, if you will. But actually, people were meant to be in community. People were meant to be parts of a larger whole and know where their membership was. Creating kind of a surrogate family because we don't have grandparents around or because we don't have aunts and uncles. So getting to be close with your friends and your neighbors and, people that you really love that you can count on so that your kids have a sense of, maybe Aunt Jenny lives in, Iowa, but, Mommy, I could talk to Mommy's really close friend. And that's like an auntie to me. And it's really important for kids to have those people who are like family. So another way to talk about creating family values is to have what's called a family meeting. And I could talk about how to have a family meeting for a really long time. But essentially, a family meeting, I would encourage you to have family meetings somewhat regularly. It could be at dinner once a Sunday. It could be a once a month thing, but having regular times where people can talk about what's going on in your family, plan schedules and events, how are things going, express grievances about rules, about how their time is being spent, but essentially that you're having regular connection points to talk about who are we, right? I have a group of a family that I'm seeing right now with 2 teenage boys. And the boys would really like to be able to go play paintball and go learn more about guns. And they're 16 and 14, and the parents are petrified about this, right? But they've been having lots of family discussions. And finally, through lots of family meetings and that culture of we, right? How do we see violence? How do we see guns and gun safety? How do we see people's use of guns in our society? They got to a place where the mom and dad agreed that if if the boys and their friends, now they've extended their village, would be willing to sit with the police officer and learn about guns and gun safety, that then they would be okay with paintball guns. And they just started in one place. But there were huge conversations about how do we as a family feel about violence? How do we as a family feel about gun use? That's just one small thing. I think sometimes, especially as your kids move into a more autonomous role as teenagers, and there's lots of questions about, well, why? Why is that the rule? You have to be able, you may still have definitive answers about what's okay and what's okay and what's not, of course. But they need to start to feel like they're more part of the discussion so that they have ownership in some of the answers and the parameters that you're putting on them. Let's see, what else about this? Of course, we have to model the values we want for our children, right? If we're creating a family culture, we have to also model that. We have to live that. If we don't want our kids to, gossip about people or be mean or inappropriate with their friends, they're watching you every time you're interacting with your friends and you're in the community, right? And then finally, talking about family of origin issues. And this is something we won't get into in great depth, but some of us come from chaotic family background structures, and we're doing our very best to create a new cycle for our family that is potentially, if you came from a violent family background or an abusive family background. And so I always encourage people, if you're coming from a family and you're not sure what's a healthy family and how to create healthy habits, seek out help, talk to people, and have those issues addressed, because guess what? We're always bringing that stuff in to our current family system.